Thank you for coming tonight to this first presentation in a switch-style format offered from Stanford Professionals in Energy. And I think you'll be pretty glad you came when you see this star lineup of presenters over here to my left. We brought presenters from around the energy industry, and I think you'll really enjoy the program tonight. My name is Lynette Kurthoys. My company is Foghorn Solutions. We do environmental consulting to primarily the energy and infrastructure industries. And my co-host.
Hi, my name is Vincent Chen, and I'm a recent graduate from the Stanford Atmosphere and Energy program, and I currently work for Lucid Motors. We are an electric car startup based in Menlo Park. Glad to be here tonight.
Mic check, and everyone in the back here, both of us? Okay, good. All right, so before we get started today, just a couple of housekeeping things. You probably saw the bathrooms are right outside here on your way in, and in the event of an emergency, we head straight down the hall to the stairwells. I'd also like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, Winston & Strawn, who I can't say enough about this beautiful facility that they've allowed us to use, and we surely appreciate the use of the space. So let's give them a quick... And we also have a speaker from their firm on our group of speakers tonight. Also TRC, an energy and environmental firm. Stormy, New Tech Solutions, my firm Foghorn Solutions, and the Eric Berendt Studios, who did our fantastic graphics for the event tonight. So with that, I also would like to, Sydney here, I'd like to introduce Sydney Larson. So you've probably heard about Stanford Professionals in Energy, and she is our founder, dynamic, and fearless leader who's here to talk about this pretty powerful organization that is grown to now over 17,000 members globally. 1,700. I mean, 1,700.
Just an order of magnitude, no. Just a zero here or there. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Wonderful to see all of your faces. As mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Stanford Professionals in Energy. We started about a little bit over 2 years ago now, and in that time have grown to over 1,700 members, and we actually very quickly became the second largest professionally oriented alumni club. So props to you all for being a part of that. Just a little bit of information about us. So the Bay Area is we have the most membership here. We also have active chapters in Washington, D.C., in Houston, and then as of this summer, Seattle and New York, and are even getting started internationally with some folks in India. And we're looking to continue to just take the organization to the next level. I brought on a new co-president to help sort of a strategic planning process that we're going to go through, and we're putting together an advisory board as well. So I'm really excited about all the momentum that we have around the country and around the globe. And the last thing that I will say, for those of you who will be in the area on Friday, October 13th, that is Stanford Alumni Weekend, and we have an event that we're planning, a tour of the Central Energy Facility on Stanford's campus, and I think it's at 4:30, but would love to see you all there. Haven't done the tour myself yet, but I've heard that it's very cool. Friday at 4:30. And with that, I will take it back. All right, thank you.
Okay, so with that, we are going to move into the switch style program. But first, I'd like to go through a few rules of the game. As you can imagine, this format is very challenging for the speakers. It is, if you didn't get a chance to check the YouTube videos from the Colorado chapter of the Rocky Mountain Energy Association of Energy Professionals, they created this format, and we surely appreciate them letting us pilot it here in San Francisco for the first time. The format involves basically 5-minute presentations. So we'll get 10 5-minute presentations tonight. And they're extra challenging for the speakers because in that 5 minutes, they will cover 20 slides that auto-advance every 15 seconds. So I'm amazed we found 10 people willing to do this. But they have practiced a lot, and they are really amazing. So key to that is we can't really ask questions, interrupt, no heckling, and that's hard. That's hard for this group because at Stanford we're taught to question and challenge and argue, and we're not doing that during their presentations. You can do it at the break, you can do it afterwards. They're all going to stay. We'll have some more happy hour time after the break. And so with that, I think that's enough rules. The other thing we're going to do that we can practice right now to speed our transition between speakers is a single, vigorous, appreciative clap. So with that, let's transfer to Vincent, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you. Beautiful. Well, thanks, Lynette. So we're going to jump right into our keynote speaker of the night. And when the editorial team set out to find the guy to speak to us today, we really want someone who could speak to the megatrends of the energy sector at this present day. And we also heeded the old advice of following the money. So surely we found our guy by doing that. Our keynote speaker tonight is Mark Platshon, and he is a visionary VC in the Bay Area. He might be no stranger to some of you guys tonight if you're in the energy industry. And Mark is the founder of Icebreaker Ventures Autonomous World Fund, which is a new corporate venture fund focusing on the future of mobility. And he is inside out fully a car guy. When he is not working with companies like Tesla or Nano, he's working on perhaps an old BMW or Porsche. That is his hobby when he doesn't work. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mark to the stage.
So you're all professionals in energy, right? You've got a big challenge ahead of you. You need to change the world in the next decade. This poor guy is counting on it. So let me start with a story. Every good story starts with once upon a time. Once upon a time, everybody used the gas ones. The gas ones were reliable, they were cheap, there was a big infrastructure to supply it. That was the way the world worked. There were these scientists and engineers who were working away on the electric ones, but they weren't very reliable, they weren't very durable, they didn't work very well. They were expensive, so most people used the gas, everybody used the gas, and the electric guys banged away in the lab. Until finally, somebody had the aha moment and said, I have one that's good enough. And in 10 years flat, in 10 years, the entire infrastructure, the entire market share changed. The world went to electric gigafactories were built, electric infrastructure was installed, and lives were improved. What am I talking about? Right, streetlights. You don't have to change any words in that story to talk about the electric car. Half of you were already there. But what can happen once the early stages of a technology get to the tipping point and get acceptable, get good enough, they can roar through an industry despite sunk costs of infrastructure and all the stuff that's installed. Of course, some people think you can't make change quickly, and you have to bet on the past and stay with legacy solutions. But we're all here to prove that that's not the case, and that decades matter. Kodak proved that, in fact, change can happen really fast. I was involved with the first online digital photography companies. We met with the CEO of Kodak, Dan Karp, in 2000, and told him that in 10 years, I live by these 10-year things, In 10 years, you wouldn't be able to get a roll of film at Costco. The last roll of film would leave Costco within a decade. I was wrong. It was 12 years, and they were bankrupt. So that makes you wonder, what the fuck is going on? What's the future? What does this really mean? How do we cope with things that can change this fast? And in fact, does that create an opportunity for those of us that are in a business where we're supposed to change the world to save that poor guy? And of course, on the other side, the Financial Times puts out a headline like this that says, this is the big green bang, we get out of the way. This shift to cleaner power is in fact inexorable, it's compelling, it's economic, it's taking over, and this is in fact the last century of fossil fuel. But if we're going to get rid of it in a generation, where's the Shell guy? Anyway, we're going to have to get going. You can't lose a decade or two and then catch up. You got to get going. So let's start. I'm going to just tick through a few little segments of the energy business to sort of build that case that things are happening on that decade pace. If we look at what's happened over the last couple of decades in solar, those of us who were trying to invest in it were trying to catch a falling knife. The costs were, we thought, well, when it's $9 a watt, maybe it'll come down to 7. Nobody thought it would go from $9 a watt to 30 cents. But that's what's happened, and that's great. The interesting thing is, of course, everybody said that was a special situation because silicon is silicon, and silicon's got all this other infrastructure that's powering it to come down the learning curve. Nothing else will follow that learning curve. This is plotting battery pack costs on the same graph, and they're coming down virtually the same learning curve at light speed. What was a $2,000 a kilowatt hour battery pack is now $140 and coming down. Hello? So I was involved in Tesla from early days on, thank goodness. But the question I get all the time is, yeah, they've shown it can be done. They made a good dent in the market, but scaling to where it really matters is really hard. They won't be able to do it. Electric can't do it. Can they get, who here thinks they'll hit 500,000 cars produced in the next couple of years? 50-50? Something like that. Interesting. So let me try to put it in perspective. Once upon a time again, there was this guy, Henry Ford. And back then there were a lot of car companies. And they could all get up to sort of 20 to 30,000 cars a year. Because cars were made by little teams of guys who bring the parts to the chassis and they assemble a car, they roll that one out and make another one. And it takes hours to build each car with a skilled set of guys. So the factories got to where they could make 20 or 30 or 35,000 cars, and that's it. Of course, he had the aha of, hey, we can do the moving assembly line, which is what you see here, and the car moves along and specialists bolt things on, and you know the whole story of the moving assembly line and paying people wages that, the living wage so they could buy a car, and the rest of the story is a pretty great story. But what we don't know, nobody's really laid out, how did he get from the 35,000 vehicles to something that mattered? Remember, back then, there was no supply chain to say, hey, I need more tires. You literally called up Henry Firestone and said, plant more rubber trees. There was no supply chain. And yet, in between 1909 and 1916, in 7 years, he went from 30,000 Model Ts a year to 500,000 Model Ts a year in inexorable increases of like doubling every year. It's crazy. And of course, the fun part now is to superimpose Tesla's behavior on top of that. The Model S is now 5 years old. And if you plot that on there, it's following this curve almost exactly. And of course, the Gigafactory, the NUMMI factory over in Fremont is scheduled to do 500,000 cars. Maybe next year, maybe the year after, we'll see. But it's kind of right on this curve. I like to think Elon didn't do this by accident. He fashions himself, a industrialist par excellence. I think we agree. And, in a decade, they went from hand-built wagons to Model Ts that every man could afford. And again, a decade made a difference. Now we come to the modern day. Chris Urmson started the crazy project to try to do autonomous cars at Google in 2009, 8 years ago. And at the time I was working with BMW, and everybody from management to the lowest engineer said, that's stupid money, just wasting it. That is a 50-year project that will never work. Of course, today, we see, autonomous cars are running around everywhere, and we're only a couple of years away from having them be prevalent. So, again, a decade, a lot can get done these days, more and more, faster and faster. And that's just a part of sort of this big transition that's happening. As you go to autonomy and save lives, as you go to connected and get efficient and get not just people movement, but goods movement moving, as you get electric and you start to rely on the grid and clean up transportation, and then you start sharing, you change the whole behavior model of a population, you change the world. Uber is 5 years old and already more valuable than any of the other car companies. And now we have countries competing for who can ban the combustion engine first. It's crazy. Netherlands, India, 2030. Of course, they don't even have a battery infrastructure to deal with it. Wind, big wind, offshore wind, 70% cheaper over the next decade. That is the cheapest way to build new power. 73% of all the new generating capacity, and more than half of that's going to be wind. Coal, that's a real WTF. But coal demand is pretty much collapsed. It's going to be gone. We don't need to worry about it. It's sad for the jobs. You could put every coal worker in Stanford Stadium at the same time. Give them each a check on the way out. That'd be the end of that. Sorry. Anyway, as you saw, I think China and India are going to invest trillions of dollars in infrastructure and clean up the planet. They're an important part of this. If we're going to, all of these efforts, which are happening and happening fast in decade timescales, get us to where we're still on an increasing temperature trend. We need to invest a lot more to really get to the 2-degree increase in a stable way. So we started with Once Upon a Time. We end with Happy Polar Bears. Thank you.